we're going live now, and I'm going to pull this up on LinkedIn as well because it's tough to see sometimes um, when we aren't. But everybody should be able to see us now. Hello, Pam. Hello, John.
Hey guys.
Hey Russ, how you doing?
I'm
Hey Pam.
great. So okay, it's been a little while since we last did one of these. Let's talk about where you've been, John. What have you been up to?
I've had a pretty exciting, I think it's a month, um, that really just working with a number of different um, companies. So there's been some significant activity that's been happening in the mining space. And, today's topic is sort of, not only incredibly interesting, but timely. So I think, I've just been working
Yeah, you're right.
really to help people to look at, okay, well, what are the opportunities, that are coming out of these mergers? There's a huge changeover in leadership in natural resources as well that is happening because of this. So you're seeing a lot of new talent coming in.
So you're seeing changeovers at a leader level, but you're also seeing changeovers at an entity sort of ownership level.
So the merger is definitely doing that. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But as well, you are seeing some, I don't want to say new blood, because generally at the executive level, the people that are stepping up are people that have been with the organization for a long time. But there's Rio Tinto recently brought in somebody from outside of the mining business to lead their copper division. So that's really sort of interesting as well.
Oh, you've sparked something for me. I want to dive into. I mean, sort of the value of bringing somebody in from the inside, who. I mean, if we think about the evolution of sort of how people come into roles, you learn how business is done. You learn a way of thinking, but I think you might also become a little risk averse to preserve your role in a company. I mean, hot seat here for a minute, Pam and John. Like, are the odds better that you're going to get more provocative thinking and new thinking from someone on the outside, or can you get that from the inside, from an inside candidate, an internal candidate too?
Okay, so
I,
we're sort of jumping into it, and
Yeah,
I
we
know
are.
that Pam has a view. So I'll just put this out there, and then hand over to Pam. But I worked for an organization for a little while, a brilliant company, Placer Dome. So it was a gold mining company. It had 14 gold mines, Canada and Australia. Great leadership group that funded a lot of the new growth that we're seeing in other mining companies. But one of the things that they did as a policy is that they would change one of the three leaders at any asset. So there's basically four leaders. There's a CFO, there's an underground manager, there's a mine manager, and there's a maintenance manager. Those four guys run in any of the assets, and basically they always had the sort of the responsibility for that asset. They put together a budget. They had to deliver it safely and productively at the right cost. And Plasterdome would switch one three of the four leaders. So the CFO always stayed the same, but they would switch one of the three operating leaders every year. And as the new guy came in and to a new asset, he would write himself a new mandate. And a little, sometimes in politics, the same sort of things happen. And he was given a target, and it really became a relay race. And what was interesting was that they were building so many new mines. They were expanding. I mean, it was a
Mm.
flourishing environment, and it really funded a lot of growth as well. So just putting that out there, and that was, I think, an incredibly successful model.
Right, Pam.
I think it depends on the individual. I think that there's research that supports and does not support both sides of that coin. And so it becomes really difficult to put any legitimate, here's what you should do. I think that if you've got individuals coming into a role from the outside, you do get that fresh thinking, but it's not to say that individuals within the organisation can't bring that up. And then I think also you've got, I read a piece of research last year. I wish I could remember who did it, that basically said you're actually, the success rate is greater for people from the inside, and that it is too difficult for an external candidate to hit the ground running, learn all the personalities and really get major, especially in a turnaround or a transitionary period. So I think you've got pluses and minuses of both, and I've seen both be successful or not. People from within who have struggled because they were the wrong person to begin with, and people from within who have hit the ground running and done a really good job. So I think that's a tough one, and I think you have to really do your homework on who the individuals are.
I think you've also got to know, I think you're right, I think you've got to know what you want as well. It's interesting, I'm working with a company now. They're a publicly listed company, and they need to grow. They're doing fine, but they really want to elevate growth. And so in recent years, they've actually acquired some businesses, but more importantly, they've brought new leaders in. And what I see is, as I have conversations with these leaders and then with incumbent executives or people that are running functions, the people who've come in are sort of saying, we just want to go and do what we need to do. The people who are in the company are saying they need to learn how things are done around here. And it's almost as though what they were brought in for, which is to help us drive growth and do new things, they're finding their hands being literally handcuffed to in terms of thinking, well, you can't do it that way. That's not the way we do it here. And isn't that the point of why you brought us in? So there's an interesting, I think one has to be absolutely clear on what you want, and then be willing to let that person either be the custodian or the stable steward or the agent provocateur, whatever it is,
You just reminded me of a wonderful comment from a mutual acquaintance of all of us, and sadly he's not with us anymore. I love him dearly, Tom Cook. But he said, "Oh, let's just hire all the experts and then tell them what to do." That's essentially what happens a lot of the time. So the other point I would add to that is what I discovered, having been in a CEO role of a publicly traded company that had a huge legacy of 75 years and being a female and being, private equity funded, is that you also need a really mature management team. You need to surround yourself with people who, A, get you and you get, that you understand each other. And the minute you don't have that, the dynamic is quite different. Politics into play, all of the things that bring the noise and prevent people from being successful as they get into the role, whether they are from the business or outside the business, come into play. So I think that it also requires, it requires you to be a particular kind of leader, but it also requires you to have the right team around you. And that's on you. I made a lot of mistakes when I look back as to the roles that I put people in and the way that I constructed the leadership team. If I had my time again, I would have thought differently and I would have done some different things. Not to say that the individuals were not brilliant people, they all were. But were they brilliant in the roles that they were given or with the interactions that they were given and the other parties involved? It's a dynamic. It's about people.
We've got to dive into that at another time. All right, so I asked Jon what he had been up to. Pam, you've been around the world and you're about to jet off again today. What have you been up to?
I had a great time sharing the future. I guess it was a little while ago now, but the reason I was around the world is I chaired the future of mining in Perth. And so that's always, it's the second year that I've done that. It's brilliant. There's about 2,000, plus or minus, I think, plus 2,000 people that gather, and it really is a conversation around the future. What's interesting there is that it's all about, a lot of the conversations are about technology, and yet almost all the conversations then came back to, and how do you bring people along with that technology, which I just love. The other thing I love about chairing that conference is that I'm actually not speaking. I'm being a journalist, and I am moderating a lot of panels, and I am coordinating and sparking the conversation as opposed to leading it, which is also quite different for me.
It is. So you're on the stage, but in a different capacity. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so lots of nuggets coming out of that. Are you going to be writing up that sort of your insights, your takeaway? I know you've tweeted along the way or you posted along the way, but
I did do a little bit of it. I think the huge word that came out of it was collaboration and cross company collaboration. Really getting people. I think the best quote of the week of the event was, "You can't do this alone." And they weren't talking about getting a team around you. They were talking about outside of the boundary of your business or your government department or your area of expertise. You really can't do it alone. So collaboration was the really big thing. If you want to really walk into that future feeling or run into that future feeling confident, you've got to be able to collaborate.
All right, that's another one that we need to follow up on at some point. Not to spark a counterpoint, but I think it was Jeff Bezos who at one point said, I actually don't really want all that much collaboration because it's going to slow us down. And so,
could be.
So how we
nature of the industry.
Yeah, that's right. The nature of the industry, and equally how you define it, right? Because collaboration doesn't mean we can't move until 2 weeks when John's back from holiday and Russell's back from his trip or whatever. It's about what does it mean and how does it show up? All right, well,
Russ, just to prevent us from talking about what we're here to talk about for another minute, but I loved the UK Prime Minister, newly elected, and one of the first things he said was that he was going to do a 12-month assessment of the military, of the defence budget, and then would draw conclusions. Are we kidding? 12 months in today's world. That's why it takes so long to move things, because you've still got people who think you need to spend 12 months assessing something before you just bloody get on with it. So, I darn near fell over backwards. Well, there were different words that I used, but 12 months my ass.
And there are people on his team who could probably give him an assessment, a very realistic gut assessment. Even if you need that,
Yeah.
Well, I think the big thing is, and I completely agree with Pam, is that time is very fluid, and what's happening these days, especially internet and various things, is that our time frames need to change. We actually have far more time if we're getting down to fundamentals. So I would say in this particular case, there's probably 3 or 4 scenarios that are already well developed and well understood, and you really have to say, based on everything new that we know, and I think it's self-correcting as well.
Yeah.
We're not going to take 12 months. We're going to do these sort of things right now, and if those feel right, then we'll do these next step things. So. What is the sufficiency? I mean, we run into this all the time.
I could never have talked about this, Russ, because I'm just looking at the time. We're 13 minutes past and we haven't started ours yet. So, sorry, John.
All right. Well, look, let's park that.
I opened a door for it.
Let's park that, because you're right, and it's something that is. I mean, time is the great leveler, right? It's the thing that if you cannot capitalize on. Someone recently this week was posting about time management, and I went on a little tirade and I went, there's no such thing as time management. You can't manage time. Time's going to do what time's going to do. You can manage your activities, your priorities, but we delude ourselves. So it's the great leveler. It can be a great accelerator and a great advantage if we know how to use it. So let's come back to that at some point. But for right now, there's a little bit of news this week that we'd been talking about this. So we've got a list of topics that we talk about all the time for our viewers and people that are watching. And on that list was something around the domain of succession and new leaders coming in and composing teams. But given the recent the news this past week about President Biden stepping down, and I reflected on, Howard Schultz stepping down and going back and stepping down and going back and stepping down again, and Bob Iger stepping down and going back. When should leaders step aside? That's the conversation that we want to throw a few little nuggets and bombs into today. So let's just put it out there. What's your perspective? I've got one. Who wants to kick us off?
I think Pam should lead us, because I had the opportunity to start before.
Go, Pam.
Again, I hate to sound wishy-washy on this, but I think it depends on the individual and all the circumstances wrapped around it. However, I have a huge opinion on the failing of two things that I think happen just about everywhere, but in politics really, really well. And that's succession planning. I think the political arena has done a terrible job historically of succession planning. And what I mean by that is really the machine that churns out potential for the future leadership. It is so short term focused. It's so narrowly focused on, that small team that gets into those spots. And then one of those guys should be the guy next time. I think I don't profess to understand the American system, but generally the VP becomes the next kind of running, the next guy to run. And you've got no mechanisms in place to attract, there's no real framework to attract or develop or get the people who actually are more likely to be aligned with your constituents and your stakeholders today. Can you tell I am working from home and I have a huge 100-pound puppy that just is barreling into me at every
He wants
second.
to be a part of the conversation, Pam.
That breathing is not me. And it's so short term. But in addition to that, the media also plays a huge role in succession planning. It can make or break your successes. So I think, the succession place. And then I think the second piece, I actually think it's less about self-awareness. I shouldn't say that because it's probably first among equals, and more about stakeholder awareness. You could be the most brilliant person in the world doing a fabulous job with all the results to back it up and demonstrate it, and every data point on the planet to tell you that you're doing a hell of a job. And yet your stakeholders may not agree, and because they're looking at it through whatever lens they're looking at it. And so I think you've got to be super stakeholder savvy today and really understand what everybody else thinks. What I don't think has anything to do with anything is age or physical ability. And so I think you could be 100 and still run a country if you have the capacity to do it and you're still a skilled leader. So I don't think that age or anything like that has anything to do with it. Physical, disability, whatever. The economist with their walker on the front. I don't care if someone needs a walker to walk. What I care about is that they're dynamic enough, their brain is there, and they've got the stakeholders on side to be able to really enable you to lead effectively.
Yeah.
So I don't think I answered your question, but that's how I feel about this subject. And we can
Is it
talk a little
different?
bit after you guys wait, and we can talk a little bit about a couple of examples of where I have seen leaders hang in there too long.
Well, that's fair. All right, Jon, why don't you weigh in?
Well, I'll give you a view. I think leadership is really around creating a sense of direction and getting people to commit their discretionary efforts to bring the group along. So it's really somebody that is managing a group. You're sort of, the President Biden example. I completely understand that there's a lot of discussion around that, and it's it's a significant topic. But I think that the majority of people, when should leaders step down? I think let's just take a little bit of a nuance on that and say, when should leaders step up and when should they step back? Stepping back allows other people to step up. So I think that you can look at this. I think that one of the reasons that family companies, companies that are going through a huge growth process that have a founder syndrome, all of those types of guys, they were started by charismatic or leaders that had a brilliant idea that got the company so far. Now, to help it to grow, they need to step back, not necessarily down. You don't have to leave, but you need to step back and allow other people to lead. And I think in a lot of cases, the mistake is not doing that. And when you miss that point, when you miss stepping back, then, you know,
Well,
a
then you
short
get the
while
stepping
later,
down.
then a short
Then,
while later, you're
yeah,
saying,
then the
I need to step
terminology
down.
changes.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's the shame of it, or the pity of it, is you have an opportunity to say, now's my time to move aside. And if you miss that window, then your stakeholders are going to tell you, now's the time for you to
Now's the
step
time you
down.
need to step down.
And that's a different impression. Yeah. So it's identifying that one moment in time that says, this is the best time to go, mate. This is
Yeah.
just, I
Yeah.
can go out looking like a freaking superstar right now. And then once you're over that little tiny window that opens up, it all changes. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, and I think,
yeah, John.
go ahead, go ahead. No, I was going to agree vehemently with Pam and say the leader is always going to have people surrounding him or her that, you know, are in that position because of the relationship to that leader. Those are people that are going to say, no, 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 don't step aside, don't step back, you know, stay where you are. But then you have to understand that there's a certain amount of, you know, self-interest being delivered there. So I don't know.
Preservation. Yeah.
It's really difficult. You have to find a quiet space in yourself, you know, wherever that well is that you go to and you contemplate and you say, now, in order for the company to grow, I need to step back and let other leaders step up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I think is interesting? I think there's a few dynamics at play. I think intrinsically, what motivates a person, what motivates a leader, is different from person to person. So there are some people who love solving an intractable problem, coming up with an idea, building that idea, but running a business is not what gets them going. And so there's a time and a place for different leaders for different people to play a role, however we define leader. Now, it would be great if you could have multiple leaders, but we know that that's ultimately untenable. And I think part of what I've seen is that you see someone who has passion and drive and energy in building something gets to the point where that business just now needs to be, that part of the business needs to be run really well while they continue to innovate and grow. The innovator and the grower doesn't care about the discipline. I'm being very sort of extreme to some degree here, but they care less about the discipline of running a business because they care about solving the problem and coming up with that next crazy thing. And so the idea of needing to prepare for an analyst call where normally I would just show up and dazzle with my genius starts to be, you know, a little bit of a conflict. So there's a self-awareness piece that I think is really, really important here. And it might be that I'm still really good at innovating, but actually what the business needs is something different. And I'm still really good at it, at what I do. So I think that that's one dimension, and it's obviously what the business actually needs. But I think if we're honest with ourselves, we can, and I've had this experience, you get to that point where you lose the spark. You lose that sort of passion for it to be. Because if you're going to lead a business, I suspect that, or an organization, doesn't have to be a business, you want to be all in. You need to be all in. It's a responsibility and an expectation that everyone else has that, you know, if anyone's thinking about this all the time, the leader's modeling some of that behavior. When you get to the point where you lose that spark, I think it should be okay, to your point, John, to say, I think I need to step back now or to step down. Because there's probably someone else with energy and drive and passion and determination who can pick up the things that just don't excite me anymore.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. I think, you know, there's so many different scenarios here, Russ, and we've talked about many of them. You've got the Boeing situation where there's, you know, the individuals who all come from the same, they're all cut from the same cloth, and they're really just kind of, you know, rotating those similar backgrounds into the roles. And then there's debate about whether, you know, they should stay or go. You've got the Disney situation where you have someone come into the role, but the incumbent is still there and weighing heavy in the background. You know, how does that work? You've got other situations where you've got people from outside of the normal running of the business who come in and take the role from within the business, but not really within the business. So another part of the business or in a different role and the business. I've experienced that. And they've done a lousy job. And then when, when one day someone says, well, maybe job isn't for you, they have to then say, well, actually, I agree with you, or no, I want to keep in the job because I want to go out on a better high than going out earlier after having a miserable job. I just think there's so many scenarios, and so it really goes back to looking at each of those situations and weighing. And you as an individual need to do that.
Yeah. And there's a couple of, I think, maybe binary tests that one could put in place. I mean, look at performance. Is performance doing what you expected it to do? Because we have a unique ability as humans to rationalize, right? So we can rationalize our performance. Oh, it was COVID, it was the market, it's interest rates, it's competition, it's AI now, right? But some companies are going to be thriving in those environments. So what's the difference between them? And is it my leadership? Is it the fact that I am either creating or not creating the opportunities for others to bring the ideas forward? They're going to move us forward. So I think one is around results and performance. The other is around, and this is a hard one, Jon, you touched on it a little bit, but it's this idea of losing the team. When you lose the team, I don't know that leaders often know they've lost the team, because the team might not be willing to sort of, I'm not saying they all need to rise up in revolt, but those of us that have been around this, we have a sense. Pam, you talked about assembling teams and having people around you. I think when you've lost the team. And sort of the hubris around being able to say, in your darkest hour at night, when you're lying awake at night, or you're not lying awake at night, which might be the problem, you're not, to say, I think I've lost these guys. I don't think they're following me. I think it's time.
I agree with you. I think that, I think that having that mature management team and having the ability to have cards on the table discussions where it is open, it's not political, so that you can really have that discussion with your people as well. And openly talk about that. I think that's the difficulty of a lot of leaders, is the inability to have someone they can have either a team or a person they can really talk to. And by that I mean trust them 100% that conversation is going to be off the record and it's just going to be real about real life. I think if you have that one confidant, your life would be, but you need to pick that one confidant really, really cautiously, because if you pick the wrong one, you can end up, in a very precarious situation, getting bad advice, or getting advice that's going to the board, or, wherever it's going, instead of just really open and honest conversations with yourselves.
What's the role of the board?
I think that there's an interesting dynamic here, guys, is that currently, and maybe this is just our culture, is that stepping down or stepping aside is seen as a negative. It's a weakness. Yeah. It's the stress was getting to you. You lost your management team. The results are not being reflective. I think that there's a huge opportunity for organizations to see leadership change, and I don't mean on a regular basis, but leadership change as a huge positive, because it allows a certain amount of reinvention. But you have to build that into the culture of the organization, and only then does it really work.
Russ, I got a question for you. I agree with you, Jon. I don't know if you read McKinsey's book about, I can't remember the title, but about the CEO, and it has, the traits that are the perfect, make up the perfect CEO. I'm paraphrasing, it's not their words at all. And in there they have about 60 or 70 profiles of CEOs. And one thing that struck me about that, or two things that struck me, apart from the fact that they represent women the same way that we do of how many are on boards or CEOs today. I think it was about 10% of them that were women, which is a shame in itself. But the other is predominantly they ran big companies and they took over leadership in big companies that have behemoths, that have machines going, that have established brands. Not a lot of them were today's interesting leaders that are out there. I would have loved to have seen the CEO of Spanx who made and
Sarah
built
Blakeney.
and sold a company. I would have loved to have seen a Reese Witherspoon with Hello Sunshine made, built, and sold a company.
That's
I'd love to see these CEOs instead of these behemoths that have very different jobs. It is a different role to run a company that's in turnaround, or to run a company that is a startup, or to run a company that, whatever the circumstances are. But the more that we profile these big behemoths with those CEOs, the more we put in place a very traditional and historical view of the CEO that I don't think exists anymore. And I think you have a very different role when you're running a large scale enterprise that has been successful for the life of its company. I get that there are many examples in there of businesses that were different or went through turnarounds and so on. It is more a perception of the overall feel of that.
It's part of what I touched on at the beginning, I think, which is that when somebody starts a business and they identify a problem in the world that they want to solve, and that problem or that solution becomes something that 100 people want, 1 million people want, 10 million people want, and that scales, and that founder who solved the problem is so closely attached to having solved that problem. You get a certain mindset and a certain DNA of operating that is very different from somebody, to your point, who, I think Procter & Gamble are clearly world-class in a lot of what they do. They're, exist in every country pretty much in the world. But what it takes to operate that business is rather different than what it takes. A different kind of hustle, drive, passion, dedication. And it kind of goes back a little bit to this idea of, the candidates from the inside versus the candidates on the outside. The candidates on the inside have learned to operate in that system. And so what if Sarah Blakeney suddenly, from Spanx, right, suddenly became, I don't know if you saw the recent clip that she posted about her conversation, or she was on a panel and I guess Mr. Wonderful was there. And his comment was something to the effect of, you need to go after your competitors like it's war. You've got to attack them and take them down, and you've got to beat them at all costs. And she sort of, you can see her sitting there somewhat pondering, do I say what I'm thinking? Do I not? And ultimately she comes out and she says, I don't think about that at all. Yeah. When I was cutting the feet out of my pantyhose to kind of show Spanx, I wasn't thinking about my competitors. I was trying to solve a problem that women and other people ultimately could embrace. But I was trying to solve a problem, and that's what I was focused on. I wanted that Nordstrom buyer to say, "I want your product." I wasn't even thinking about the competition. So you get somebody who's grown up in an environment where it's either all about the competition or all about the market, increasingly quarterly results and so on. You are going to get a very different, I think, response to those people who show up having hustled, and it doesn't have to be hustle. I'm not talking hustle culture here. I'm just talking about having built something.
Having built something, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think also just follow that through, and I get the cynical, the cynic will say that a lot of these guys sell their businesses just to cash out. But perhaps they're also selling their businesses because they know they've done their job. And now it's time to move on to a different environment, to get this business be a different business than it has been in this build from scratch startup. And I think that talks to what we're talking about. And those individuals who say now's the time to sell, I think a lot of the times they're actually saying now's the time to build something different, to give this company the next plateau. Ryan Reynolds and his, I know,
oh my gosh,
I'm picking all these celebrities, but they're building Ashton Kutcher, they're building things from scratch, and then at a point in time they say now it's time to cash out. I don't think they're doing it to cash out. I think they're doing it because I've done my job. And
that's right. My
individual now to run this business. Right. I'm stepping aside.
I would love, so I don't know that we can have back and forth conversations on LinkedIn Lives the way you can, with comments coming on from other platforms. But I just got a message from Janice Burns. So Janice was the head of the corporate university, chief learning officer at MasterCard. I've known Janice for a very long time. And so if you're talking, people think MasterCard's a financial services company, but it's really a technology company, right? A technology company that is into fintech and is at scale. I mean, powering billions, trillions of dollars of transactions every minute. And I think Janice could be an interesting person to bring onto one of our future conversations to dive into, having seen it from you trying to create an incubator type mindset within a big company. How does one do? And you're a very visible, sort of critical public company that Congress has their eye on and everyone has their eye on. How do you walk that line? What does leadership look like? I have a question about boards though, because you talked about them, Pam. Jon, what's the role of the board in helping a leader to determine when they need to step aside or how they're doing?
Well, I think the board has a huge role in supporting the smooth transition of power, to be blunt, and as well giving some counsel. That I don't want to, I want to sort of change the dynamic a little bit. Stepping down or stepping back should not be seen as a sign of weakness. That I actually think is a sign of awareness and understanding. It's not a lack of capability. It's actually an understanding that I'm going to help. I've solved that problem. I'm now going to go on to other problems. I'm going to hand this over to the maintenance group. They are going to maintain the operating results. They're going to grow them a little bit. I'm going to go and get. So I think the board can help support that elder statesman move and I say an elder statesman, not because it's got anything to do with age, but that it's the role of stepping back and assessing, as opposed to being in the minute by minute, day to day fray, of running a business, which I think a lot of leaders are caught on that treadmill of just solving that problem and talking to the next issue, and at what point in time are they stepping back? I think boards help leaders to step back, because the board relationship is a much longer view. They're not in the business, or they shouldn't be. They should not be in the business. Problem.
A lot of them are shareholders. A lot of them have stakes in it, Jon, and so they are in it for the short term, and they are thinking short term, and therein lies the problem.
I think you're. That's
not all, but some. Sorry to.
That's an important point. One of the. I do a fair amount of work with boards, and there's a terminology that I like to use, which is, nose in, fingers out. So get your nose in there, be looking, but keep your fingers out. Don't be touching. So the board role, I think, is
you, Jon. I think the board has a huge role in leadership succession, and I have seen it both
in leadership succession. I'm talking day-to-day operations. Sorry.
Sure. But I've seen it from within. I've seen it through the eyes of our clients, and I've seen it, from personal experience. And that I think the worst thing a board can do is not be transparent. The moment a board can be perceived to be doing backdoor sidebar conversations, and not managing openly and professionally the transition of a leader, then I think all bets are off, and I think you get the mess that you land with.
I'm enjoying kind of where we're going with the board conversation. So the board needs to be enough in the business to know when the signs are there, when the red flags appear, right? And if the senior mostly, and we're talking here, look, clearly boards care about CEOs and certain key positions, and less so as we move through an organization. So it's not only a board, but if there are no truth tellers within the organization, if there's no one sitting down with the CEO, and who does that, right? Because everyone reports to the CEO. If there's no one sitting down with the CEO and saying, I think we've got a challenge. I don't think your drive, your energy, your vision is captivating, compelling, building people forward. Then that's the board's responsibility. But then beyond that, you've got to your point, Pam, create that culture, that environment where there is transparency and truth telling. So,
Yeah.
who does that? Unfortunately, a lot of the time, I think it falls to talent or HR functions, which in some cases are terrific. In some cases are administrators of process. So there's probably a big role to be played there too, around who's holding the mirror up and who's got integrity behind the mirror when they hold that up as well.
I think board selection is probably, above CEO selection and board selection are both huge critical. I've seen boards, I've heard boards who have said, I don't understand your business and it's not my job to. Well, bullshit. Your job is to understand the business that you're on the board of, and if you're not going to take the time to do that, then shame on you. And then you get what you get. Poor performing business, well, that's on you. Understand the business as much as your senior. Maybe not as much. You're probably sitting on a number of boards. But if you don't fundamentally understand the business, and if you're always falling back on and saying, oh, geez, I don't understand the business, that's your job, shame on you. And then I think that as a CEO, you do want to have a confidant who's on the board, because they understand the board dynamic, they understand and they should understand the market, they should understand the business, and they should understand you and your leadership team. And so if you can and that is so difficult, because, then you've got the politics of the board that comes in, but I want to keep my job, so, I may or may not want to be the absolute truth sayer and mirror and confident that you want. And then if you can't trust that individual, boy, are you in big trouble there. I just think this is such a, we could talk for hours about this, such a nitty-gritty conversation, but it all has a role to play in helping a leader understand, is it time to continue to step forward?
That's right.
Or do I need to step aside at the right time? And if you don't get that right, one more point on that, Russ, and that's that, we've all seen boards where the politics of the board actually doesn't transparently discuss the CEO succession. They've made, a group has made a decision, and then they, behind the scenes, are trying to manipulate a situation where that individual either goes, or the incumbent has to tell the individual that they're going, or something like that. And I've seen that now in 3 or 4 occasions play out. And it's unfortunate, because it leaves you with a board nobody trusts, whether they, and even with that leader going, people know what's transpired. And so there's very little trust anymore, or faith in that board. So everything falls apart. So there's just so much that you could talk about with this.
There absolutely is. I think, I try to pull a list of things that I would look for, right? If I were, and I have been in roles, we've all been in those roles. What are some of the things that I look for as early warning signals that perhaps I'm not having the impact I could have? And the signal I could rationalize and bypass or not, do I look at some really good people and they're leaving to go to other opportunities? Maybe we just have reached a growth plateau and there aren't opportunities for them. Or maybe I'm being greedy and hanging on to a position that I should let go, to your point, Jon, and step back so someone can step forward. We've talked about results. We've talked about the support you get in the market. We talked about that energy, the drive, the passion. Legacy is a dangerous one, because we all are. When do you step away? Because that's the defining moment. Maybe another year, another quarter, we can get out of this slump, or we can get over another hurdle. It's really tough, and it's not an easy position to be in the first instance. And now we're throwing sort of a complication. We don't often talk about this, right? We talk about how to get into the role. We never talk about how to leave the role, which I think is really interesting.
How to transition out. Geez, I've been in situations where I've been asked to negotiate with the incumbent, and it was not my role to do that. And so that's, that makes it even worse. To be able to really enable that individual to determine, is it the right time or not? I mean, in a lot of instances, the results show it. and that's it. Then your next obvious is, as you said, you've lost the team. Your next obvious is the stakeholder perception is different, and it may not be accurate, but it's a perception and it's held.
Yeah.
And so there's all of those situations that come into play.
And then you have the ultimate sort of, I'm going to leave the CEO role, but now I'm going to become the chairman. I'm really going to let go, but I'm not.
Yeah. Anybody who takes that role when the CEO becomes chairman, don't take the job. You are better off to get an external player from outside the organisation than to have someone within the business take the role of someone who is remaining in the business. I think that's a recipe for disaster.
I don't know if it was Les Schwab or reading the biography of Sam Walton, which we were chatting about this weekend on LinkedIn. That's how we chat. No, it's not. But and talked about hiring somebody into a position, and the person said, "I'll come, but I want to be fired for my actions." In other words, I'm gonna make, if I'm gonna be fired, it's because of things I've done, not because of things you've wanted me to do. And I think that's an important sense of self-awareness, right, around contribution and so on. All right, so Jon, closing out, what's happening over the next few days, and what's of curiosity to you right now? Your microphone, I think, is off.
Yeah, we're talking about as a run up to a pretty exciting time in the United States and in North America and the world with a change in leadership. So obviously there's a lot of awareness and thinking going around that, and certainly our conversations here are almost at the time. There's also a ton of things that are happening in the big picture. There's Toronto's just gone through, and I live in Toronto. We've just gone through a huge climate event where we had a month's worth of water drop on the city in a day, actually in an afternoon, and so the city flooded. And Toronto has 3 rivers that run through it, but a whole bunch of creeks and things like that we've overbuilt. So there's, I think, certainly in the world, we are seeing climate change and climate change events moving public perception a little bit, and whether it's talking about insurance rates and are they keeping up, or how are we building for the future? But there's a ton of work that's being done as well, because we're starting that electrification process. We're moving towards that. People are stealing copper out of cables and hydro wires and things like that, because the price of copper is going up, because we're not building copper mines because we don't have enough copper to fund the growth in electrification. So there's a whole bunch of knock-on events that we're just starting to see right now that are going to change our future. So right now I'm sort of talking to a number of organizations that are in that mode. Pam was talking about it taking 12 years to assess what the British military solution should look like. Well, Canada's doing the same thing. Because we're not spending enough on and by the way, we now have a new head of the Canadian military who is a woman, and the big thing that she's dealing with is how to buy military hardware to get our spending up, get not only the right stuff, but we don't have the capacity to build it anymore. But the other thing that she's dealing with is the whole sexual discrimination thing that's been in the armed forces for a little while. Yeah. But that aside, the organizations that I'm working with is, how are we going to build a faster mine? Because right now in Canada, it takes 10 years to build a mine.
To get a mine up to.
And yeah, and 10 years, and that's regulation. I mean, there's obviously a lot of things that we can do to streamline things. That's not in the best interest of the organization. It's not in the best interest of the local communities necessarily, because they want the employment, but they also want a share in how we are going
Yeah, of course.
to enjoy this asset. So the stuff that I'm working on is that sort of
That's terrific.
framework right now. And of course, leadership and stepping down, that's a big part of it, because the people that are in the positions are sort of like used to, well, this is how we always have done in the past. And that's not what we need.
And if I'm starting a mine today, I might not be there in 10 years, or maybe I shouldn't be there in 10 years because it's a different skill set, right?
Well, it shouldn't take 10 years.
Well, it shouldn't
3,
take 10
5,
years, yeah.
we don't, 10 is sort of like, oh my God,
Outlier.
really?
Yeah. Pam, can you tell us, what are you heading off to London for?
Youth can lead. So a huge focus on youth leadership now. Really starting to talk to people about how do you get young people to lead. I think that, they step out of school and they're in leadership roles often right away. The minute you are responsible to work with another individual, that's a leadership type role.
Yeah.
But we don't give them any capability or skill set to do that, and we think that it comes from sports or team things that happen at school and so on. Small fact, a lot of the kids drop out of organised sport as their years into high school go. Girls particularly do. And so it's not happening through sport, and it's not happening through osmosis. So that whole concept of youth can lead. So that's, the focus for me for this trip is all around that.
Oh, terrific. Well, that's marvelous. Well, I'm looking forward. We're going to get something on the cards in the next little bit so we can pick up our cadence and get back to this. I've got family that's heading back to Australia, family that's heading up to New York. So we are all over the place as our summer continues, but slowly starts this little wind down. And hopefully we'll be up in a non-flooded Toronto before too long. So I'll see you there, Jon. No, your mic's off, but that's okay. You smiled.
We are drier now. Yes,
You're drier.
We've stopped up the water.
You needed to put your swimming to use, Russ.
I do.
On the Don Valley, you would have been in huge trouble.
Apparently, you've got a few lakes near you. So
absolutely.
I think there's one right behind me.
Oh, there we go then. All right. Well, look, Jon, Pam, always terrific seeing you. We'll figure out our text so that next week we can get comments coming in. Have a great week wherever you are.
Have a great week. See you, Jono.
Yeah. Cheers, Pam. Cheers, Russ.
Bye, Jon. Bye, Pam.